When we talk about the Bible in terms of reliability and translations and such, the term manuscripts comes up again and again. If you've watched some of the other videos so far, I mentioned manuscripts probably in every single one of them. What exactly are we talking about? Do we have original writings of the Bible stored away in vaults somewhere? Are they scrolls or books or what? We'll take a look at that, exactly what they are, what folks are referring to, and what's all this talk about manuscripts next. We have Bibles. We read these, believe in them, we trust them. We trust that the message contained within them is presented in the way that the original writings were penned. We know that Scripture wasn't originally penned in English, and as a result, we have translations. It's why you have an English Standard Version or a New American Standard or a King James. We have translations to both account for differences in language and for the evolution of culture and the understanding of the spoken word. Basically, we just talk different as generations pass. And when you get too many generations removed from a Bible, people start to have a harder time understanding it. So we update it. We update it to fit the language and the way people speak. We don't change the message. We put it in a context in which people can understand. And of course, we know that these translations come from the study of manuscripts. This takes us from translation to the topic of transmission. How is and how was the message copied and distributed? At first glance, it seems pretty simple, right? Paul writes a letter to the church of Ephesus. Cool. We'll call this Ephesians. And simply copy and paste from Paul's paper, and boom, done. Paul's original letter would be called what is an autograph. And if we had those, you could absolutely do it. The problem is we don't have any of those. We don't have any autographs. We don't have any of the originals. The originals would have been written on parchment or papyrus, clay or wax tablets. They're gone, long since dissolved into dust. There were no PDFs. There were no Word documents saved to the cloud. So how do we know what Paul wrote? The originals are long gone. We do not have them. Lucky for us, there were no privacy laws back then when people were copying stuff like crazy. And remember, there was no newspaper, no email, no social media. If a story was going to travel, it did so by word of mouth, by written word carried by foot or camel, maybe horses. And both were precious and they were extremely valuable. Think about when a current TV show is going to release the next streaming episode. People lose their mind. They're waiting for it just on bated breath. And we have stuff instantly. What if you didn't have nothing? What if you didn't have hardly anything to read, or there was no such thing as watching something? I guess you could watch people fight or camels race. These stories being moved around the world and moved around the country, people were all about it. Especially, what is this topic? This is God. They were all about wanting to know about this. So these manuscripts, these copies, folks carrying these around, they were a big deal. As such, the detailing event around God were considered to be a huge deal. So what we have is a set of Bible translations based off copied manuscripts versions of the original autographs. These manuscripts were copied from the actual one penned by the original author. We're just getting versions after the fact. There are over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament. The oldest is called P52, and it details, or I shouldn't say detail, it is a fragment of John 18, 31 through 33. It's a fragment of the writing, and it's pretty neat because they write on the front and the back. This thing is dated around 125 AD, and it's probably even younger than the date. So think about this. Most of the New Testament books were written between 49 and 95 AD, meaning this fragment was in circulation within 100 years of Jesus. That's a pretty big deal. See, we think that 100 years, that's ancient. Not then, not in that period of time. That's pretty recent. Side note on the New Testament, of all the writings that claim to be Gospels, the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John are the earliest written. That's pretty cool, giving them quite a boost in credibility and claim of authority. Of all the Christian writings that have been discovered, the 27 books of the New Testament are the earliest of them all, which is kind of neat. What we consider to be canon is indeed the earliest, closest to the lifetime of Christ writings in existence. These are the only writings from the first century. Everything else is written later, sometimes quite a bit later. What's more, Paul's writings are the earliest Christian writings of all of them. Either Galatians or James is considered to be the earliest Christian writing. Now keep in mind, I keep saying Christian writing. You might say, wow, I think Genesis is way older than Galatians. Well, yeah, you'd be right. Christian writings means after Jesus. Remember, there were no Christians before Jesus rose from the dead. These manuscripts, like P52, sometimes they're just scraps of writings. It's not like there's a bunch of tubes and they have just multiple copies of each of the 66 books. You got a whole closet in the New Testament and they're all perfectly laid out scrolls. And no, sometimes it's just a scrap. Sometimes it's a rip. Sometimes it's just part of a book, part of a chapter. But there's lots of parts and lots of scraps of paper. And from all those scraps of paper, you eventually can put it all back together. Whether a little or a lot, when you combine all the various pieces, we end up with the whole thing. Now keep in mind, people didn't realize this at first. We had Bibles which were translated in language, but as more and more manuscripts were discovered, pretty soon Christians and scholars began to realize they were amassing a complete set. Man, I think we got the whole thing. Okay, we said there are over 5,000 manuscripts for the New Testament. That's insane. That's awesome. For the Old Testament, there are over 25,000 manuscripts. Some of the most notable being found within the Dead Sea Scrolls. The manuscript evidence before the Dead Sea Scrolls was dated around 1000 AD. The Dead Sea Scrolls put the manuscript evidence within 200 BC to 70 AD. That means we got way earlier writings with these. The variations in the scrolls and our modern Old Testaments are very slight. It's estimated that about 90% of the Old Testament can be reconstructed from the manuscript evidence beyond a reasonable. So, the current number of Greek manuscripts right now is over 5,000. I think it's 5,700, something like that. That's incredible when compared to other ancient manuscripts, other ancient pieces of literature. You might be thinking, well, hey, that's great. Cool. The New Testament has 5,000 manuscripts. Wonderful. So what? Well, when you find out that other literary works rarely exceed 20 or more manuscripts, and then you've got thousands of the Bible, that's a big credit to reliability there. Now, when I say 5,000 or 5,700, more than that for the New Testament, we're talking about Greek. There are Coptic, Latin, Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, Arabic. There are several other forms of manuscripts out there as well of the New Testament. Over 10,000 Latin manuscripts. There's no shortage of early documentation for the New Testament writing. It's estimated that there are 1,000 times the manuscript evidence for the New Testament than the average historical author's works. It is estimated that there are 1,000 times more manuscripts of the New Testament than the average historical author's works. The closest being Homer. Not that one, this one. He has over 2,000, maybe around 2,500 manuscripts exist. Consider that by comparison. We just mentioned over 15,000 different versions of the New Testament. But remember, I'm mentioning different languages. kind of want to float with those Greek ones. So if that wasn't enough, there's another word I could throw out here. Patristics, patrology. We're talking about the church fathers here. These would be people like Irenaeus, Clement of Rome, Polycarp, folks like that. Turns out these folks wrote a lot, and they wrote things. Well, when they wrote things, they're quoting and they're citing New Testament manuscripts. You end up with hundreds of thousands of quotations and references from these patriarch commentaries and writings. It's been determined that if every single existence of the Greek manuscripts, those 5,700, were lost, if we lost all the Greek manuscripts, we could still reproduce all of the New Testament except for like half a dozen verses. That's incredible. That's amazing. Okay, so what? The New Testament, the Old Testament, we have more old scraps of paper than anybody else. Well, we have more literary evidence. We have more confidence in what we read was what was originally written. We can reproduce what was originally said. You can trust the Bible you have. You might say, well, wait a minute, Eric. I've heard that there are hundreds of thousands of errors in the Bible. Well, that's true and not true. There's hundreds of thousands of transcribal alterations, you might say. There's issues in the Bible, yes, where a line is out of place, a sentence is structured differently, a word may be spelled incorrectly or differently. The message, the story, the account does not change at all. So, okay, so you're telling me there is thousands, hundreds of thousands of stuff like this? Is the Bible just a hot mess? Well, no. Because remember, we just talked about having thousands and thousands of manuscripts. And you can see, you can compare, and you can contrast. You'll see this in other videos too. Not just mine, hopefully. You'll look into this and you'll see this from other authors and from other folks. How you know the Bible is accurate? You look through all these manuscripts and you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you're like, whoa, that's different. Move that off to the side. Reading, and you end up having the original message from that compare-contrast method. We'll get more into that later. But having all these manuscripts pretty much erases the concern when scribe over here misspelled something, or the scribe over here got up to take a break and come back and sat down and started on the wrong line. It happens. Remember, these were humans. It does not diminish the inerrancy or the infallibility of God's message. So what's the takeaway here? How does this help me in witnessing to folks and defending my faith? Well, you can never know too much about the Bible. You can never know too much about God's Word, not just what it says, but how do you have it? Why do you have it? One of the greatest stumbling blocks for unbelievers is the Bible. They don't want to trust that there's this Jesus because you read about it in this crazy old book. I'm not trusting that book. Why not? Well, it's old. I don't know who wrote it. It's full of mistakes. Really? Well, what if you have that conversation with someone, but you've looked into it and you know, well, I'm pretty sure I know where it came from. And I'm pretty sure it hasn't been changed all that much because there's, yet again, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, and they pretty much, these tell the same story. And you translate this into modern day English and it tells the same story. You're not shaken. You're not shaken when someone questions the Bible. You can talk about it. The questions are easy to answer. Now, what should we probably not do? You don't want to go in a conversation with folks and start witnessing to them about P52 manuscript of John, or there's 5,700 New Testament manuscripts and Homer doesn't have anywhere near that. Their eyes are going to glaze over. It's going to sound like you don't know what you're talking about, and you're just trying to confuse them with facts and points. No, just confidently proclaim you trust it. And if they want to hear about some of that, you'd be glad to tell them why you trust it and show them and give them some links to videos and some, I'll give you some articles if you want to look at it. But I'm telling you, this Bible's true. You can think it's not all you want. I'm telling you it is. I've looked into it. We need to have confidence. You can't defend what you don't believe in. We have to know what the Bible said. We have to know why we believe it. Not just because Grandpa said so. Not just because your pastor said so or your life group teacher has always told you to. You need to know it is real and true as the air you're breathing.